The Salt Path is a 2018 memoir by British writer Raina Wynne. To date, the book has sold 2 million copies, has spawned 2 sequels, and has just been adapted into a major motion picture directed by Marianne Elliott and starring Gillian Anderson and Jason Isaacs. But in this moment of marketing and promotion for the film's release, a piece of investigative journalism has been published by The Observer about the supposedly true story behind this true story. The article, written by Chloe Hajmatheou, is titled "The Real Salt Path: How a Blockbuster Book and Film Was Spun from Lies, Deceit, and Desperation." The article claims to expose the truth behind the Salt Path, which, allegedly, is not the truth that we've all been told. So we're going to go through this article and also look at the statements that have just come out from the publisher, Penguin, and the author herself in response to this pretty exciting controversy. Let's go. To start with, what is the Salt Path? Well, the Salt Path has been marketed as a work of non-fiction, a memoir, a travel book, about what happened to the writer Raina Wynne and her husband Moth when they were evicted from their home after they supposedly invested in a company owned by a friend. After the company failed, that friend said that they were liable for those losses, took them to court, and they lost their home. And at the time that they lost their home, Moth, the author's husband, was diagnosed with a degenerative brain disease. The disease is known as corticobasal degeneration, or CBD. And after the loss of their home and his diagnosis, they decided to take a walk. They strapped tents and backpacks to their backs and they walked the 1,000-kilometer southwest coast path of England. And the book is the story of that walk and how it proved to be spiritually and even physically healing. And now, as I said, we've also got a film adaptation of that story starring Gillian Anderson and Jason Isaacs, 2 actors I absolutely love. But according to The Observer, the true story behind the Salt Path is not what we think, and it's a lot darker than what we've been told. In her article, Lucy Hajmatheou describes her experience of meeting and talking with a woman named Ros Hemmings. Hemmings was an old acquaintance of the author of The Salt Path back when they lived in North Wales. And the contrast between the story of The Salt Path and the story that Hemmings tells is staggering. Standing proudly on the red carpet outside the Lighthouse Cinema in Newquay, Raina, 60, told TV cameras at the film's UK premiere that the experience was almost unbelievable. In that moment, she and Moth seemed like the ultimate examples of British grit and perseverance. Back in Wales, Hemmings saw a very different picture, because she knew something about Wynne that almost everyone, her publishers, her agents, the film producers, had missed. She knew that Raina Wynne wasn't her real name and that several aspects of her story were untrue. She also believed she was a thief. Now, I've already briefly gone over the setup for the Salt Path and how the Wynnes supposedly lost their home. The article goes over it briefly as well and then says this: "But this bears little resemblance to what Hemmings remembered. Her claims that it was all just a business deal that went wrong really upset me," she says, "when really she had embezzled the money from my husband. It made me feel sick." Now, Ros Hemmings' husband Martin has since passed away, and in her interview with Lucy Hajmatheou, Ros Hemmings explains how Raina Wynne, real name Sally Walker, was working for Ros's husband Martin, and allegedly embezzled a lot of money from him. In the early 2000s, Hemmings says, Wynne was working part-time as a bookkeeper in her husband's family-run business, an estate agency and property surveyor in Pwllheli in North Wales. At that time, Wynne was known by her legal name, Sally Walker. Her husband, Moth, is really Tim Walker. A few years after Sally Walker started working there, Hemmings says her husband, Martin, started to notice that money had gone missing. Hemmings says that one day in 2008, Martin looked at the company bank balance and realized that Walker had failed to deposit a large sum of cash. So, we brought all the books home and started working backwards through them, Hemmings told me. There was around £9,000 missing over the previous few months. After the truth came out about £9,000 having gone missing, Hemmings claims that Walker appeared at her doorstep with the money, claiming how she had to sell her mother's wedding dress to get the money together to give back to her. But that wasn't the end of it, because when Roz and Martin looked back over the years of Walker having worked for him, they estimated that £64,000 had gone missing. So Martin ended up getting the police involved. Walker was taken in for questioning and later released, after which she promptly vanished. From here, Hajji Matthew takes us to London, where she interviewed a woman named Rebecca about her and her late husband James's relationship to the Walker couple. Rebecca and James, by the way, are not their real names. They asked for their names to be changed for the article. And in her interview, Rebecca explains how her late husband James was a distant relation of Tim Walker. Walker told him she was on the run from the police because her employer had found out she had been taking money and was going to prosecute her criminally. James arranged a deal under which he would lend Walker the money to repay the sum she had allegedly stolen, Rebecca says. He also got her a good solicitor. Back in Wales, Hemmings recalls how her husband Martin was contacted by some fancy London solicitor who told them Walker would pay all the missing money and would cover legal costs on both sides if, and only if, Martin agreed not to pursue a criminal case against her. Martin has also had to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Martin ended up accepting this proposal. The criminal charges were dropped and that was kind of the end of it, except it wasn't. And here's where we get, in my opinion, a kind of convergence between the truth as it's been told by this piece of investigative journalism and the truth as it's been told by Raina Wynn, author of The Salt Path. Months later, James's business went bust, and in 2010, his loan to the Walkers was transferred to two men he owed money to. The men called in the Walkers' loan and, when they didn't pay, took them to court in 2012. During the case, James filed a witness statement in which he told the court that the purpose of the loan is clear. It was required to settle a criminal allegation made against Mrs. Walker. The court ruled that the Walkers had to repay the debt, which with interest now exceeded £150,000. If they failed to do so within 1 year, the new creditors could repossess their home. You see what I mean about this apparent convergence of truths? Now, there's still more to the article, and I've linked it in the description. It's a fantastic piece of writing, and I urge you to go read it for yourself. But there is one other thing from much later in the article that I do want to touch on before we move on. And that's because it's something that emotionally upset me personally. See, the alleged truth behind the author's financial struggles and the loss of her home isn't the only thing that's been called into question here. The other thing that's been called into question is her husband's diagnosis. Lucy Hadjimatheou also investigated the nature of his illness. Professor Michelle Hu is a consultant neurologist and professor of clinical neuroscience at Oxford University. She says that Moth's presentation of CBD does not tally with anything she has seen in her clinical practice. I would be very skeptical that it is corticobasal. I've never looked after anyone that's lived that long, she told me. Another neurologist said that Moth's history with CBD does not pass the sniff test. This is something that irked me personally, and I'm sure it's irked a lot of people. Because if his diagnosis and his illness is untrue, it would be incredibly cruel. And here I'm going to briefly bring up something I don't think I've ever mentioned on my channel before, which is that my mother is a long-term sufferer of multiple sclerosis, MS. She was diagnosed about 25 years ago when when I was 10 years old. And as a family, we have been incredibly lucky because she's still with us. Many people diagnosed with MS do not live as long as my mother has. And over these 25 years, I have watched my mother's health slowly deteriorate. And the idea that anyone allegedly might be lying about the diagnosis of a degenerative disease, well, that upsets me personally. And it's the real reason that I'm making this, because yes, this is a very interesting story. If true, these allegations are shocking and surprising, but it's not earth-shattering. This whole story of alleged embezzlement is, depending on your position, arguably not as shocking and upsetting as what, say, Neil Gaiman has been accused of having done. But it's this idea that Moth might not have been diagnosed with what he claims to have been diagnosed with. That's what really upset me personally, because I have a personal relationship to something very similar. And so here we are. Now, between the Observer article being published and this video being published, we've had responses from both Penguin and Raina Wynn herself, so let's go through those as well. A BBC News headline reads, "Penguin says it did all necessary due diligence with the Salt Path." In a statement issued to BBC News, the publisher said, Penguin, Michael Joseph, published The Salt Path in 2018 and, like many readers, we were moved and inspired by Raina's story and its message of hope. Penguin undertook all the necessary pre-publication due diligence, including a contract with an author warranty about factual accuracy and a legal read, as is standard with most works of non-fiction. A legal read means the book would have been looked over by a lawyer before its publication. Prior to the Observer inquiry, we had not received any concerns about the book's content, the publisher added. And we've also had a response from Raina Wynn herself. Another BBC News article ran with the headline, Raina Wynn hits back at claims she misled readers. In a lengthy statement posted on her website on Wednesday, Wynn responded in detail to the claims made in the Observer. She provided documents that appeared to confirm her husband Moth had previously been diagnosed with corticobasal degeneration. She also stood by her description of how the couple came to lose their house and denied the couple had any outstanding debts. However, Wynn acknowledged making mistakes earlier in her career, after the Observer said she had defrauded her previous employer of £64,000. She said it had been a pressured time. Any mistakes I made during the years in that office I deeply regret and I am truly sorry, she said, but added the case had been settled between her and her ex-employer on a non-admissions basis. And although she was questioned by the police, she was not charged. Wynn shared photographs of documents that appeared to show medical experts acknowledging or referring to Moth's condition or symptoms. One letter appears to show that Moth had previously been considered as having an atypical form of corticobasal degeneration, but further examination suggested he may have an even more unusual disorder, perhaps monogenetic. Wynn said a CBS diagnosis does not come from a simple test, but rather from a long and complex route of observation where sufferers may have symptoms for many years before they finally reach a diagnosis. She added, we will always be grateful that Moth's version of CBS is indolent. Its slow progression has allowed us time to discover how walking helps him. Wynn said she had documented Moth's illness with such a level of honesty that this is the most unbearable of the allegations, adding, my books have become a record of his health. This is obviously a very contentious situation, and honestly, I don't feel qualified or morally right in laying down any kind of judgment here. If the accusations are true and his diagnosis is false, well, I would feel sick to my stomach. I think a lot of people would. But medicine is complicated. It's very easy to take something incredibly nuanced and simplify it down into a simple diagnosis for the sake of a narrative. And I'm fairly sure that we haven't heard the end of this controversy. Raina Wynn has hit back against the Observer's article, and who knows if the truth will ever be perfectly laid out. It's going to be interesting going forward, but also the idea that there are allegedly untruths surrounding the salt path specifically, it's not all that important. It's what this represents when it comes to us believing people's stories, the memoirs that they write. It's just sad how this is going to raise the general level of skepticism that we have towards non-fiction stories like her memoir. Suddenly the phrase, take everything with a pinch of salt, doesn't feel like enough. It's not a pinch or a grain, but a truckload. How much salt do we need to take things with from now on? But I'm also very aware that this isn't the first time a controversy surrounding a non-fiction book has cropped up. But if these allegations are true, the people that I feel most sorry for are the Hemmingses. Hemmings' husband, who is now no longer with us, allegedly had so much money embezzled from his business. And that is crushing. It's also crushing how, if Moth's diagnosis turned out to be false, people who had that disease would have been given a false hope in how they might be able to manage or even reverse the degenerative illness that they're suffering with. The story itself isn't what's most important, it's the way that it'll spiral, the way that our cynicism levels are going to rise, and it's just disappointing, isn't it? Anyway, if you got something out of this video, if you enjoy these kinds of videos that I make, then please consider supporting me on Patreon. My Patreon community is an amazing, enlightening, supportive, diverse space, and I'd love your support, and for you to join my Patreon community as well. Thanks in advance, and subscribe for books.